guys, and welcome to today's video, which is about change and unpredictability and how they affect rats in terms of stress. So first, I think it's probably wise to define the terms that we're going to be talking about, just so that everybody fully understands what I mean. So we'll start off with predictability and unpredictability, which are obviously opposite sides of the same coin. Predictability is when an animal knows what to expect in the environment. It can also extend to routines because we influence our pets, but it's essentially when the environment around the individual animal remains the same, and therefore the rat can feel as though they can exert control. Then I might use the word novel, and that just means something that is new in the environment. So it generally refers to something that hasn't been experienced by an individual rat before. So we could use it to refer to a new foraging toy that had just been bought and placed in the cage. But we couldn't use it to refer to a hammock that had been used before but washed and is now being reused. Then we're looking at change. So that's when things in the environment move from one state to another. So in this case, we would use it to refer to the hammock that has been washed and then reused, because it's gone from being dirty and smelling of rats to being washed and smelling of washing up powder. And then it comes back into the cage. It's familiar, but it's changed. And finally, I'll be talking about complexity, or how complex an environment is. And that just means really the number of things in the environment. So a cage that has 50 cage items in it is complex. A cage that has substrate, a water bottle, a feeding bowl, and a hammock is not complex. But the environment is obviously much more than just the cage environment. It can also extend to the wider environment and to the social relationships, both rats to rats and rats to humans and vice versa. So today we're only going to be talking about these concepts in relation to the social environment. And I'm really talking about rats to rats today. So we won't really be looking at the human to rat environment or the rat to human environment. The rat's social environment within the cage is complex, and that's because each individual rat has many variables that they bring to the table. That can be some of the things that we've already discussed. So temperamental traits, functional characters, preferences and needs can all vary from rat to rat. They can all vary to some degree within one individual rat, depending on other things that are going on. For instance, if a rat's in pain, they may behave very differently to when they're not. So for the purposes of today, let's think about a cage group which has got several members, let's say 7 or 8, and has been together for a while. So this is an established cage group who have been living with continuity and without change for several months. The rats in the group are well bonded and, generally speaking, get on well with each other. So we can see that within that cage group, the rats will be able to predict the environment, the social environment, to some degree. So they might think of Uncle Bob Rat, who you don't bother when he's eating or you might get a slap. Or they might know that if you're in trouble and need help, then Hovis is likely to appear. They might understand that Old Man Henry can't get off the floor anymore, but if you go to him, he provides a nice warm pillow and likes a snuggle during the night. These are all predictable social things for the rats in the group. They can only predict in this way because they know the rats involved and they've lived with them in a stable environment long enough to understand the way that each rat works. Much like us as humans, they have just learned to accommodate each other through living together side by side. And they accommodate the unpleasant just as much as they accommodate the pleasant. So the social context in this group is both predictable and complex, and that gives rats a sense of felt safety. There's lots for them to enjoy, and they feel like they have control simply because they understand how everything works. So this is a group where the rats will experience very little social stress. Yes, there may be the odd argument or tussle over a favourite piece of food, but generally speaking, these rats are rubbing along well. Very few animals, including humans, like change. Rats don't like change, though they do like novelty. And that's a strange combination because we would think that novelty and change are similar. But change often results, especially in terms of social change, it results in difficulty and stress. Novelty, certainly in terms of the wider environment, generally speaking, if it happens in small incremental changes, is something to be embraced and enjoyed. Novelty in terms of social relationships is something that rats inherently tend to shy away from. However, most rats are sociable and can be convinced that stranger rats are to be embraced and enjoyed as well. So what might change look like in the context of this social group? So it might come in the shape of hormones. As rats grow and change and become mature adults, there are ages when hormones are likely to fluctuate. When they fluctuate in middle to old age and drop away, that doesn't tend to usually cause problems. And in a stable group, even the social hierarchical structure can remain the same. So a rat who's been a priority individual as a youngster tends to keep that role throughout middle age and on into old age. Occasionally, particularly if new rats are brought in, they may be overthrown. In younger rats, hormonal changes often cause a lot of problems for social groups. And although this group is stable at the moment, if some of the rats are 5 months old, they may be looking at big changes coming over the next couple of months. This is because as the androgens increase, male rats tend to become more competitive and often more combative. And where hormones are in some way disrupted, hormonal aggression can arise. Change can also come when rats become ill or have an injury that causes pain. This kind of change can be quite debilitating for the whole group because any member of the group can be affected. Where rats who are essential to the structure and function of the group are affected, this can cause a strong sense of felt unsafety, and the rats may lose confidence in the leadership of the group. Other changes occur if a rat is taken out of the group for any reason, or if a rat is added to the group for any reason. And finally, death is the ultimate change. And again, rats who are integral to the cohesive nature and function of the group are the rats who will have the biggest effect if they should die. So any stable group can face social change at any time. Sometimes the group will cope with this and carry on regardless. At other times, the change is large, such as adding 2 or 3 more rats to the group. In this scenario, the change is enormous, and uncertainty and lack of confidence in the structure and integrity of the group often results. This can cause problems as all of the rats involved start to adjust to living together. When rats are facing these big changes, novelty becomes negative rather than positive, and that can lead to stress. Additions to the group probably do cause the most stress, simply because of the fact that all the rats have to make new bonds and integrate the new rats fully into the social structure for the group to continue to be successful. Where this doesn't happen immediately, the group can become insecure and anxious. So what has changed from the stable group to the unstable group. Essentially, what has changed is that the rat can no longer predict the environment. They had all those characteristics and foibles down to a fine art, and then suddenly they're faced with new rats who have different preferences, different needs, different ways of doing things. If those rats are related to them, it's actually often that they recognize the patterns and behaviors that they see, and integration into the group is easy. But sometimes stranger rats are very difficult to understand because their patterns of behavior and small differences in the way that they operate can have a big effect on the group. They also come in with different experiences, different temperaments, and different functional characters. So what happens if the group already has a priority individual and the group coming in also has a priority individual? How do those two sit side by side? Well, they don't. So in that case, there is always going to be a period of adjustment as a new hierarchy is formed. It's very rare for there to be two priority individuals in a group, and often when two are brought together and they're both of a similar degree of strength and capability, this can lead to ongoing unrest within the group as the two individuals will try to fight it out over a period of time. And by that, I don't mean that they're tearing strips off each other, but just that they will constantly be bumping into each other and posturing and having power struggles until one way or another, one of them decides to give in and allow the other to take the role. New individuals coming in brings the threat of uncertainty. Uncertainty is debilitating for all of us, but it is debilitating for rats who like to be able to predict what's happening and what the future might hold. Not being able to predict the future tends to lead to anxiety and stress responses. So we can see that stable social groups are an imperative for rats as far as is possible. There are always choices to be made, and often it's not possible to maintain a constant and peaceful social group from kittenhood through to old age. That would be lovely, but it doesn't really happen. So at some point, the rats are going to have to face incoming new rats. There are many ways that we can make that easier on them. The first one is to avoid those flashpoints of hormonal fluctuation, particularly in male rats. Male rats between the ages of about 5 and 9 months, maybe a little older than that, tend to have the worst hormonal aggression problems. So it's wise to not bring in new rats who are that age, or to not bring in new rats when the resident rats become that age. It's also wise, if possible, to bring in related rats, particularly when you're bringing in adults rather than kittens. That can lead to a much more peaceful and gentle introduction. Having said that, many rats are sociable and are able to accept stranger rats without much fuss. Being able to predict when things are going to be a problem and which rats we bring in that may be difficult to introduce, such as rats who've had a checkered history of stressful events, disturbance events, and emotional problems, are easy to predict as being more likely to be difficult to introduce to resident rats. So how much change and how much predictability do rats need to be comfortable and live lives of low-level stress or healthy stress? Essentially, change should be limited to enable the rats to live a predictable life as far as is humanly possible. That means maintaining routines so that they can predict what's happening in their wider environment, and also to manage social relationships beyond the group. Change in and of itself in terms of environmental change is, generally speaking, a positive thing when it's small and incremental, and a negative thing when it's big and overwhelming. So when something's novel, it's interesting, and rats are very curious and investigative creatures, and most of them will want to engage with things that are new. But if everything's new, it just becomes overwhelming. Nothing is the same, nothing is predictable. So it's best to serve change or newness up in small amounts, because that way rats can predict what's going on and the novelty can be enjoyed. In terms of their social environment, this is how the majority of their lives should be: predictable, stable, steady, and safe feeling relationships. So we've now looked at 3 of the really big things that can cause stress to rats in terms of chronic stress, ongoing stress, and instability. They were the events that happen between conception and the rat being about 5 or 6 months old, at the end of social development, when they had developmental plasticity. Then there were disturbance events, those big events that happen periodically throughout the lives of most rats. And then today we were talking about change and unpredictability. And social stress is actually one of the major causes of stress for rats. It's thought to be one of the few stresses that is enough to create a post-traumatic stress type of disorder for rats. So these are the big stressors, and now that we've got a really good picture of what can go wrong, we're going to move on to looking at the things that we can do about that. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like and subscribe. I'll see you over on the Nature or Nurture Facebook group, and thank you for watching. Bye.